Hey guys, tonight we settle into the softest corner of Olympus, where the only thunder is the gentle crackle of kindling and the goddess in charge prefers warm bread over war cries. You stand just inside a bright circle of firelight, toes warming, cloak steaming, while outside the marble halls of the gods echo with bragging, scheming, and the occasional flying goblet. Here, though, the light is honey-colored, the air smells like roasted grain, and you realize, with a little smile, that you've wandered into Hestia's company, where divinity is measured in degrees of comfort rather than decibels of drama. You probably won't survive this, at least not the overwhelming temptation to curl up and nap on a mythical rug, but let's try together. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. Olympus runs on eternal time, but your clock matters here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a floor that's warm as bread fresh from the oven, and the first thing you notice is how the flame behaves. Steady, patient, like a host who has already set out cups and insists you sit first, explains second. Hestia doesn't rush you. She never rushes anyone. Mainstream fact: in Greek religion, every household had a hearth that served as the domestic altar, and Hestia's name was invoked first and last at sacrifices. She bookended the rite like the polite punctuation that makes a sentence behave. You can almost hear priests at the Bedtime, the public hearth of the city, murmuring her name before any grand invocation to Zeus, Athena, or the fashionable celebrity god of the week. You lift your palms to the heat and feel it soak in. Around you, the room seems to be composed of all the best parts of a kitchen, a chapel, and a lullaby. A clay pot simmers, and the steam has the shy sweetness of barley and honey. Somewhere, a basket of figs waits like a promise. A soft broom leans near the threshold, bristles perfumed with laurel. Yes, even divine coziness requires sweeping. Hestia, you realize, rules not by lightning bolt, but by thermostat and snacks, which is arguably more powerful. The other Olympians can keep their weapons. This goddess can make an empire sit down, breathe, and share bread, joke one. You glance toward a low stone ledge where new firewood sits in careful order, olive roots, laurel twigs, and a few aromatic chips that pop softly, as if applauding the evening. Hestia herself is hard to catch in a statue. She's often imagined veiled, calm, seated, the still point of a turning world. But here, it's the flame that carries her face. The glow touches your cheek like a grandmother who suspects you skipped lunch. A quirky tidbit warms your ear. When a Greek family moved to a new home, they often carried a coal from the old hearth to kindle the new, as if Hestia herself were changing a dress with them. No paperwork required, just fire and memory. You sink onto a low stool and let your shoulders drop. Somewhere beyond this sanctuary, Zeus is rearranging treaties, Athena is drafting battle plans with crisp handwriting, and Hermes is borrowing someone's sandals again. Here the news is whether the porridge will skim properly. You breathe out, and the flame answers with a little nod. Historians still argue whether Hestia literally ceded her place among the 12 to Dionysus in later traditions, a polite musical chairs so the party god could have a seat, or whether that swap is a post-classical rationalization for lists that couldn't count. Either way, you can see Hestia smiling and waving them to the table, saying, "Fine, but wipe your feet first." You take in small details that make this shrine feel lived in. A ring of ash carefully scored like a sundial. A clay cup turned upside down beside a loaf, waiting for the first sip and first slice to be hers. The doorway is dressed with woolen fillets that sway when the night opens and closes, whispering the threshold's secret. Every welcome begins at the hearth. That's the civic secret, too. In the city center, the Bedtime sacred fire is tended so the polis has a shared heart. Colonists leaving to found a new town would carry fire from that communal hearth, as if taking a seed from the mother tree. The flame wasn't metaphor, it was municipal identity with excellent heat output. Hestia's quiet spreads across your bones the way warm soup spreads across an empty afternoon. You listen to the domestic orchestra, clay lids tapping, oil pooling in a lamp, the small sigh wood makes when it gives up its last flame. No one brags here, Even the gods who drop by uninvited take their voices down 2 notches and somehow stop wearing sandals indoors. Hestia encourages manners by existing. You find yourself sitting straighter, speaking softer, and privately vowing to fold laundry before it achieves consciousness. Joke 2. A shadow moves. Maybe hers, maybe the smoke playing at Mythology. She doesn't ask for oaths, only attention to what sustains. You think of the ritual choreography mortals follow. A pinch of barley tossed into the flame before eating, a small libation poured on the floor, a whispered thanks to the house's warm center. There's power in the ordinariness. It repeats, and repetition is a kind of spell. Scholars call this everyday piety, but you call it that comfortable moment when soup smiles back. You let your gaze wander to a simple iron trivet, blackened and beloved, and a pair of tongs resting like sleeping snakes. The tools matter. They signal that sacredness here is practical. Heat for bread, warmth for guests, light for reading, calm for arguments that refuse to escalate under watchful embers. You imagine Hermes trying to tell a lie and the flame cracking loudly in protest. Even tricksters behave when the room is this well lit. The hearth makes everyone honest enough to share the last olive. Joke 3. Beyond the doorsill, the world fusses. Within, Hestia's radius says, eat, rest, remember. You think of myths that barely mention her, and the mystery feels intentional. She is the room, not the loudest person inside it. You sense how Greek households must have trusted that. Children learning to greet the fire each morning, travelers touching the city's hearth as a sign of belonging, brides circling the blaze with grain in their palms, as if mapping a future of quiet suppers and patient floors. The flame does not perform. It persists. The pot finally murmurs that it's ready. A ladle dips, and the smell rises buttery and bright. The first spoonful is for Hestia, of course. The second is for you, because even mortals deserve bedtime carbohydrates. You taste it, sweet, humble, miraculous in its own uneventful way, and feel your jaw unclench. Your thoughts stop tripping over themselves. Your posture choose the shape of a comma instead of an exclamation point. The room approves. You place your empty cup near the ash ring and feel that domestic benediction settle like a shawl. There are gods for oceans, skies, and bronze-shod tantrums, but only one for the place where you warm your hands and decide to be kind. As the lamp winks a little lower, you realize Hestia has already begun the lesson that will carry you through the night. That coziness is not a retreat from meaning, but the hearth where meaning is baked, sliced, and shared. You keep your hands near the warmth and let the flame retell beginnings, because fires are excellent at remembering. Before the loaf and the ladle and the hush, there is a young goddess with very old manners, Hestia, firstborn to Rhea and Cronus, opening her eyes into a world where being born wasn't the hard part. Being allowed to stay born was. Cronus, you recall, had a habit of solving parenting anxieties with a swallow. It's not the kind of diet anyone recommends, but it certainly kept the nursery quiet. Joke 1. He gulped each child as if time itself could be stored in his stomach. Hestia, then Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon. The house went silent, the hearth went dark, and Rhea began planning. Mainstream fact. In the standard mythic cycle, Cronus devours his offspring to prevent a prophecy of overthrow, until Rhea saves the youngest, Zeus, by substituting a stone. Later, Zeus forces Cronus to disgorge his siblings, and the Olympians take their places. The detail that matters for your drowsy heart is the way poets describe Hestia. Firstborn in and first out, or sometimes first in and last out, so that she becomes both the opening and the closing of divine order. The story is myth, yes, but the symbolism feels like architecture. The house begins and ends at its hearth. You imagine the scene. You won't linger, just enough to set the room. Zeus stands with the kind of confidence only a baby raised on goat milk and destiny can muster. Cronus retches up the swallowed gods and outsteps Hestia, not brandishing a spear, not demanding a crown, just smoothing her dress and looking for dry kindling. While her siblings sprint to their portfolios, storms, seas, oaths, agriculture, she chooses the center. Someone in every family opts for the seat that keeps the soup from burning. On Olympus, that someone is a goddess who prefers harmony over headlines. A quirky tidbit hums at the edge of the flame. Some Greeks swore oaths by Hestia, not because she was frightening, but precisely because she wasn't. Oaths tied to home and honesty feel safer near the hearth than under a thundercloud. The penalty is social and sacred. Break your word, and you're not just lying to a god, you're lying in your own kitchen. That's the kind of consequence even tricksters respect. Hermes can filch cows and invent liars, but he still clears his throat near the fire and remembers his indoor voice. You take a slow breath and let the family constellation settle. Zeus, the headline-generating sibling. Hera, the strategist with a glare that can wrinkle bronze. Poseidon, always sounding slightly damp. Demeter, patient and fierce. Hades, a king of quiet contracts. And Hestia, the stillness that makes all the noise legible. Historians still argue whether Hestia's firstborn status represents a very early stratum of Greek religion, an echo of when household cults dominated, or whether it is simply a poet's neat way to frame ritual custom, since she receives the first and last libations. You shrug into the ambiguity like a shawl. Either way, the flame keeps doing what flames do, beginning and ending things with equal courtesy. The fire shows you how she survives in a family of specialists. When gods quarrel, and they do, because immortality leaves a lot of hours to fill, Hestia stays seated, tending. When mortals petition the sky, the sea, the fields, they first nod to the room they're standing in. A pinch of barley, a sip of wine, a soft name. Hestia. That small libation is her biography in miniature. She is never the plot twist, always the punctuation. You feel your breathing sinking to the pattern. In with the glow, out with the smoke, a paragraph in your lungs. There's a hush to the story of her refusal too. Later, when the household has seats and names, two gods approach with bouquets of chaos. Poseidon, who can promise mansions with ocean views. Apollo, who can offer playlists and prophecies. Hestia declines both, vows to remain unmarried, and secures, in return, the honor of the central seat in every house. It's not anti-romance, it's pro-equilibrium. She doesn't remove love, she gives it a temperature and a table. Consider it the earliest, "It's not you, it's my boundary" speech, joke 2, delivered with perfect grace and an oven mitt. You shift your feet closer to the heat and catch a flicker of the other siblings' reactions. Hera tightens the household ledger, appreciative. Demeter smiles, already imagining loaves that rise without drama. Zeus nods and calls it good for optics, then gets distracted by a thundercloud. Hermes sneaks a biscuit and promises to return the plate. Artemis gives a discreet thumbs up from the doorway. Hestia says little and adds another log. Another mainstream anchor slides into place. Ancient rituals framed their offerings with Hestia's name. Public sacrifices in the city, even the splashy ones to Athena on the Acropolis, opened and closed with a nod to the hearth. The Prytaneion's civil fire, fed by officials, was less a monument than a living policy. While the flame burned, the city had a pulse. Colonists departing for a new settlement took coals from that flame to light a twin in their new square, a smoldering passport that stamped identity into geography. The goddess of the house became the goddess of the map. You lean in. The fire answers with a pop like a friendly period. Historians still argue whether Hestia ever had elaborate temples of her own. She appears to prefer rooms that already belong to everyone. There are traces here and there of dedicated altars and a handful of quiet sanctuaries, but the dominant pattern is domestic. Kitchens, thresholds, council houses. If you're looking for her, they say, look where soup comes to a simmer or where a treaty gets signed with shared bread. Another quirky corner. When babies were named, some households carried the child around the hearth in a gentle procession, introducing the new life to the old flame, as if to say, meet the center, please use it well. You picture Hestia smiling at each small face, stamping their passport to belonging with warmth instead of ink. She is not the nurse. She is the nursery light left on. You consider the cosmic irony that the quietest sister becomes the one you cannot do without. Remove the sea, and ships fail. Remove the sky, and weather stops. Remove the hearth, and everything people mean by home unthreads. Hestia's myth of survival is not a single daring escape. It is the constant success of showing up. She survives loud siblings by being the place they return when the volume wears them out. The flame shifts again, a lazy golden yawn. You think of Cronus, the bad example tucked safely in the preface, and allow one last parental observation. Swallowing your children doesn't silence the future. It only gives it indigestion. Joke 3. Rhea, by contrast, nurtures the solution. Zeus brings the revolution. Hestia keeps the lights on after the celebration ends, which is when civilization happens. Dishes washed, floors swept, bread set to rise, promises renewed. You feel the rhythm of that post-party peace, the holiness of tidying up. You sit back, warmed all the way to your ankles, and understand why poets sometimes call Hestia the hearth of the cosmos. Not because galaxies bake pies, though that's a charming image, but because order requires a center, and centers are quiet. She is first in, and in some tellings, last out. The bracket of divine sentences, the margin note reminding everyone to be decent before they are grand. You let the glow smooth your thoughts into neat lines. The gods will keep shouting somewhere down the corridor. Here, the firstborn keeps vigil, and the world remembers how to rest. You stay where the heat is, because the flame is about to rehearse its favorite boundary, the gentle, unwavering no. If the last section set the family table, this one pours you a cup of clarity and slides you the plate labeled Hestia's Choice. You already know the headline. 2 handsome resumes arrive. Poseidon with ocean view real estate, and Apollo with glowing references in music and prophecy. And the goddess of the hearth thanks them both, smiles kindly, and declines. No drama, no thunderbolts, no amphitheater breakup speeches. Just a calm, domestic miracle. A decision that rearranges the furniture of Olympus without scratching the floor. Mainstream fact. In the standard mythic tradition, Hestia takes a vow of perpetual virginity, refusing marriage and receiving, in return, the highest honor, Zeus's guarantee of precedence in the house and at the hearth. The poets frame it as her reward and her office. First and last at sacrifices, central seat in homes, guardian of thresholds. You can almost hear Zeus clearing his throat, promising not a crown or a weapon, but something rarer among immortals: undisturbed space. In a pantheon addicted to plot twists, Hestia chooses continuity. You watch the suitors make their pitch. Poseidon arrives with the charisma of a crashing wave, all turquoise bravado and the promise of seaside palaces where the salt air would keep bread ever so slightly damp. You suspect Hestia has opinions about humidity and ovens. Apollo follows with sunlight in his hair, holding out a lyre and a guarantee of excellent playlists, plus VIP access to the oracle's calendar. Hestia hears them both, feeds them both, because of course she does, and answers with a boundary that glows instead of burns. Thank you, no. You can feel the way the room changes when a no is not an argument but a shelter. Hestia's refusal isn't anti-love, it's pro-house. By stepping out of the marital merry-go-round that powers so many myths, she becomes the stable axis those myths quietly depend on. The hearth does not wed the wave or the sun. It gives them a place to dry off and eat after they've exhausted the world. A quirky tidbit drifts in with the smoke. Some households, when settling dispute or celebrating reconciliation, would touch hands over the hearth, as if letting Hestia notarize the peace. It's not carved in stone law, it's the soft custom that lives in kitchens. Your grandmother's "shake on it, now have some bread." You imagine Apollo, golden and a little baffled, learning that the only acceptable encore here is sweeping the floor. Poseidon, to his credit, probably leaves a nice shell on the threshold and promises not to splash. Joke 1. Zeus's role in this is important too, because even thunder gods know a good HVAC system when they see one. He ratifies Hestia's vow, no takebacks, no whispers, and grants her the uncontested hearth seat. That's not just etiquette, it's cosmology. By championing the goddess of no thank you, he legitimizes choice as divine policy. Historians still argue whether this vow reflects an archaic stratum of Greek religion, when household cults and female guardianship of the fire had primacy, or whether later poets retrofitted Hestia with virginity to match changing ideals about purity and domestic virtue. Either way, the vow lands with the authority of a lid, settling on a well-behaved pot. You feel the social resonance. In mortal houses, marriage is public theater, processions, torches, songs. But the first quiet act of the union often happens by the hearth. The bride led to the groom's fire, grain scattered, a small libation poured to Hestia, the home's center acknowledging a new pair of hands. Now look again at Hestia's no. And by abstaining, she becomes available to all marriages as their neutral witness, the house's voice saying, "Bring your storms and songs, but leave your shoes by the door." It's the original conflict of interest policy, signed in ash. Another mainstream anchor flares. Before any sacrifice to any god, Greeks customarily offered Hestia a small grain or sip first, and again at the end. She is the ritual bracket. Your memory flickers back to the Pratenion coal carried by colonists, a municipal keepsake gone portable. Hestia's presence travels not by statue on a cart, but by ember in a cup. Statues crack, embers immigrate. If you're mapping influence, that's the stealthiest kind. You think about the personalities involved. Poseidon habitually turns up the drama to 11, earthshaker, seething, magnificent. Apollo delivers TED Talks with live harp. Their pitches to Hestia are on brand, and somehow that makes her no even clearer. She isn't rejecting them, she's declining their genres. Her genre is continuance. You can hear Hermes trying to help, suggesting a compromise. What about a casual situationship with shared custody of the kindling, and Hestia smiling while gently moving his hand away from the cookie jar? Joke 2. Scholarly whispers gather like steam on the lid. Historians still argue whether the myth of Hestia refusing Apollo and Poseidon is early and widespread, or a later codification, inconsistent across regions and sources. Some city-states foregrounded her cult, others barely footnoted it. The uneven evidence leaves room for lovely contradictions. A goddess everywhere implied, seldom narrated. You shrug again into that ambiguity. Meanwhile, the spoon keeps stirring. Consider the practical magic of that refusal. In a pantheon where unions produce rivalries, offspring, and 1,000 subplots, Hestia's freedom from entanglement makes her an unthreatening presence in every household. She can sit in anyone's kitchen without becoming anyone's scandal. That neutrality gives her unusual reach. Rich or poor, city or farm, newlyweds or old friends, all claim her glow without fear of angering someone's ex-god. Olympus could use more of that HR energy, and Hestia has impeccable references. A fringe-leaning whisper curls from the ashes. Some folk practices imagine taking a pinch of clean hearth ash to mark a threshold during times of illness or unrest, an ashy signature that says, "The center is awake." It's not canonical doctrine, it's kitchen wisdom. In your ear, Hestia explains nothing, just keeps the ember box full. The message is almost hilariously simple. Eat, rest, be decent, repeat. If there were sacred sticky notes, hers would read, "Have you had water today?" which is both spiritual counsel and grandmotherly nagging. Joke 3. You drift to the threshold to feel how boundaries behave in her room. The doorframe is dressed with wool fillets again, and that broom with laurel-scented bristles stands ready. Doorways are where stories enter, where suitors stand, where choices are made. Hestia's no turns the threshold from a stage into a filter. Only what is hospitable passes. It's the architectural version of a soft-spoken bouncer who lets in kindness and asks chaos to try another nightclub down the mountain. Meanwhile, the family doesn't pause. Demeter brings flour, Hera checks the seating chart for feasts, Athena silently approves the logistics, Artemis drops off a basket of olives and leaves before anyone suggests small talk, and Dionysus, if he's been admitted to the 12 tonight, arrives with a pitcher and a promise to keep the volume reasonable. Hestia gives him the side-eye that only someone who pours the first cup and the last cup can manage. The wine behaves. The refusal ripples outward into mortal ethics. If the goddess of the hearth can define herself by what she will not do, mortals at their fires can learn the same domestic bravery. No to cruelty at the table, No to breaking bread and then breaking trust. No to letting the heat that keeps soup warm ignite tempers. Oaths by Hestia carry exactly that ethos, home as witness. If you swear by the hearth and lie, it's not thunder that will punish you. It's the look your entire community gives you when the soup sours. Sometimes that's worse than thunder. And because you love a callback, listen to the flame remembering Cronus and indigestion one last time. Power that consumes cannot digest the future. Hestia's power nourishes it. Her no keeps capacity free for everyone else's yes, to voyages, to harvests, to songs, to treaties. When the door closes, the coal stays bright, and tomorrow's breakfast is already thinking about itself. You return to your stool. The pot murmurs. The air tastes faintly of honey again, the promise of the small libation that bookends everything. You understand the cozy math. Subtract romance, add availability. Subtract spectacle, add reliability. Subtract conquest, add home. The goddess who says no gives everyone else a reason to come back. In a world built on myths of pursuit, her story is permission to rest. The flame steadies, and you feel steadier with it. Morning wakes the house from the center outward, as if the flame yawns and the walls remember what they are. You kneel to the hearth where yesterday's coals hid under a blanket of ash, and you coax them the way you coax a sleepy friend. A breath, a twig, a promise of breakfast. The ember considers your offer, then accepts, and the orange rises like a polite sun arranged to fit indoors. You feel that soft triumph travel through the room. Pots will simmer, bread will warm, and a day will stack its minutes around this circle of heat the way bracelets stack around a wrist. Mainstream fact: Greek homes treated the hearth as the domestic altar, the literal cult place of Hestia. Household worship began and ended here, with small libations and a pinch of barley before any meal. You follow the choreography almost without thinking. A few grains to the fire, a whispered thanks, the first sip tipped to the floor, careful not to splash the clean-swept edge. The room approves. Even the cat, already circling for scraps, sits as if the ritual also applies to him. Which, in his mind, it does. Joke 1. You move through morning jobs that feel like prayers disguised as chores. Someone sweeps ash into a neat ring. Someone else wipes soot from the lip of a pot. Oil lamps crouch nearby, wicks trimmed, their first light borrowed from the hearth like citizens borrowing authority from the city's prytaneon. Outside, neighbors haggle over olives. Inside, you measure flour by handfuls and patience by breaths. The house hums at a low heat. Talk quiet, footsteps deliberate, spoons honest. There's architecture folded inside this firelight, older than your breakfast. You picture the Mycenaean megaron, the great hall with a central hearth encircled by columns, stone proof that long before marble gods had favorite hilltops, houses already knew to put the flame in the middle and arrange dignity around it. Even later, in tighter courtyard homes, Hestia's spot remains the directional arrow of the oikos. The bedchambers, the storeroom, the women's workrooms, the men's andron for symposia. Each space negotiates its purpose by how close it sits to the heat. If rooms were planets, the hearth would be their steady star. A pot begins to talk, soft bubble talk, and today's voice is chickpeas. You skim with a wooden spoon, thinking of Demeter and the quiet complexity of legumes that pretend to be simple. The first bowl touches the floor for Hestia, a modest libation of soup smell, because even coziness pays its tithe. When the children drift in, sleep-tousled, sandals half-laced, you tap the bench in invitation, and they come by gravitational law. You sprinkle crushed salt, you pass bread, and morning becomes a small festival with no speeches, only crumbs. Quirky tidbit. When you need to purify the room for a family rite, you make kernips, lustral water, by lifting a brand from the hearth, letting it flame for a breath, and then plunging it into a bowl so the hiss makes the water sacred. You watch the little cloud rise and drift across door lintel and quiet heads, and even your skepticism relaxes. The house is washed in sound as much as in water, and Hestia, practical as ever, provides the brand without fuss. By midday, the hearth's voice lowers to a simmer. The courtyard blazes. Laundry stiffens on lines. A neighbor knocks to borrow a sieve and leaves with a fig as collateral. You roast barley on a shallow pan, and the whole room smells like toast and peace. A traveler crosses the threshold and pauses. Everyone pauses at thresholds. Then your hand lifts in the easy choreography of Xenia. Guest friendship. Sit. Warm your feet. Here is water. Here is bread. Bika-diki. Hestia is the unspoken co-host. Your hospitality borrows her authority the way those lamps borrowed her flame. You place a tiny crust in the fire first. An RSVP delivered to the goddess in crumbs. Historians still argue whether every home kept the fire perpetually burning or simply relit it each morning from a tinderbox or neighbor's coal. Some swear a responsible household never let the flame die. Others point to practicalities: summer heat, scarcity of fuel, the logic of banking coals rather than feeding flames all night. You bank yours carefully at dusk, partly for thrift, partly for the pleasure of coaxing it back to life at dawn. Either way, the habit feels like a handshake with time. Afternoon leans in, and the flame becomes a patient listener. Arguments step toward it and grow reasonable. No one wishes to shout with Hestia present. Children invent kingdoms with fig leaves for crowns and a copper ladle for a scepter. Their treaty negotiations happen beside the ash ring, and the cat approves the terms by sitting on them. A neighbor brings news from the agora. A philosopher tried to explain the cosmos using dough as a metaphor. You nod, unsurprised. Bread understands expansion and structure and the ethics of not hogging the oven. Joke 2. You notice little superstitions that have attached themselves like good luck lint. A pinch of salt tossed into a sputtering pot to calm it. A quiet touch to the hearthstone before leaving the house, like tapping a pocket to check for keys. A half-joking, half-serious murmur. Hestia, keep it warm, when the weather sulks. Some evenings, when an infant finally receives a name, the family carries the baby around the hearth and back to the mother's arms. One small orbit to certify belonging. The flame does not sign papers. It blesses routines. As dusk folds itself into the room, lamps tilt toward you with expectant faces. You give each a kiss of fire, and they lift their small suns to corners where the hearth's glow can't reach. Bread returns to the table for the second time today, but supper has the relaxed abundance of stories. Olives, a wedge of cheese, a dish of greens, a jug of wine that behaves because Hestia is watching. The first sip tips to the floor again, the last sip too. The ritual bracket closing the sentence of the day with grammatical satisfaction. Occasionally, a guest quotes tidy wisdom. Good order in the house is good order in the city. Here, the connection is not theoretical. The municipal hearth in the Prytaneion burns as your lamps burn. Officials dine there as your children do here. When colonists leave to found a new town, they lift an ember from that public flame as if lifting one from your own, carrying it across sea and chance to begin a second center. You imagine the ember wrapped like a precious fruit in wool, tiny and stubborn, the seed of streets yet to be swept. The house cools its voice for the late hour. Someone scrubs the pot's soot with sand. Someone shakes the rush mats. Someone draws a finger along the ash ring and smiles to see it even. You feed the fire one last honest log, not to blaze but to glow, a nightlight for grown-ups and gods. A neighbor steps in with a question about a boundary wall, and you both discuss it here, because if you plan in firelight, the plan tends to be kind. The cat learns this too. He attempts to discuss the boundary of the fish plate, and the flame crackles at him like a raised eyebrow. Joke 3. When it's truly night, prayers shrink to breath-sized. You thank Hestia for the day's dull miracles. Nothing boiled over. A guest arrived and left content. The chickpeas remembered to be chickpeas. The broom found every crumb. You bank the coals. Ash over ember, lid over pot, quiet over talk. Shadows lengthen into calm geometry. The threshold drowses, but stays alert to late feet. Lamps wink out one by one until only the hearth remains, an orange pupil in a darkened room. You lie down close enough to feel the last heat kiss your ankles. Dream voices in the street fade. Roof tiles click as they cool. A corner of you listens for the coal's small breathing. The house sleeps the way a cat sleeps, lightly, ready to spring for the dawn. You think of the Megaron's ancestral circle, of Kernips hissing holiness into water, of children orbiting their naming path, of colonists cradling embers on black water, of Hestia sitting with all of it, making sure the soup does not burn and the quarrel does not scorch. Warmth teaches order without sermon. The center keeps its promise. You exhale and are kept. You leave the house flame drowsing under its ash cap and follow its civic cousin uphill, because private warmth is only half the story. Hestia keeps cities together the way she keeps soup from separating, by a steady, patient heat at the center. You step into the morning brightness of the agora, sandals tapping past stalls of figs and fish, past the gossip geometry of philosophers, and your eye keeps snagging on one building more than the rest, the Prytaneion, the city's hearth house, where Hestia holds office hours for the whole polis. The doorframe here scuffs your shoulder with a kind of ceremonial familiarity. Inside, you feel the air change, cooler stone, quieter voices. And there it is, the public hearth, bright and composed, giving off the same persuasive warmth as your kitchen fire, only scaled up to fit a community. Mainstream fact: many Greek city-states maintained a sacred fire for Hestia in the Prytaneion. Magistrates dined there, state guests were hosted there, and official business borrowed its dignity from the steady, sanctioned blaze. The city's pulse can be taken by this light. A steward moves like a librarian of embers, tidying ash, feeding a measured twig, checking the rim where yesterday's libations dried into a thin, sugary crust. You hear the low clink of cups, public meals served to those whom the city honors with saetesis, dining at the hearth's expense. Yes, free lunch exists, but it comes with civic virtue baked in. Joke 1. Decrees will later inscribe some benefactor's name alongside the privilege to eat here for life. A lifetime seat at the warm table where policy tastes like barley and rosemary. Around the room you catch the silhouettes of authority. A low table where ambassadors set their travel dust. A bench where messengers catch their breath. An alcove where a small archive of clay seals naps. In some cities, Hestia is addressed here as Prytaneia. In others, she is Boulaya, hearth of the council, breathing calm into debates that would otherwise boil. You watch a handful of officials lean in toward one another with that particular Prytanean tone, measured, salted with courtesy, less thunderous than the assembly in the open air. There's a power to doing politics within earshot of an unblinking flame. A quirky tidbit cracks like kindling. If a city suffered ritual pollution, a murder in a sanctuary, a plague, a catastrophe, custom might require extinguishing fires across the urban fabric and relighting them from a purified source, often the Prytanean or even a respected neighbor city. Imagine the hush of an evening when every hearth goes dark at once, and the dawn when runners carry coals street to street, door to door, as if rethreading the city with warmth. The first kettles to murmur that morning would sound like a choir returning after silence. You drift to the threshold and watch newcomers pause. Hospitality on the household scale becomes diplomacy here. Xenia widened to proxenia. A visiting envoy steps in. A magistrate offers water, bread, a space to breathe. The first sip tips to the floor for Hestia, because the goddess who keeps a family civil also keeps treaties from fraying. It's difficult to thunder at someone when both of you are holding warm cups in a room that smells faintly of olive smoke. The flame lowers voices by simply existing. It's the original de-escalation technique, no flowchart required. Joke 2. The steward lifts a brand and touches it to waiting oil lamps, because the city needs pockets of light sent out to offices and archives and corridors where scribes lean over wax tablets. Those little flames step into their errands like interns wearing fresh sandals. Messages leave, judgments arrive, and Hestia's signature is present in all of it. An orange annotation on the margins of law. You can feel how ritual brackets decision. A grain to the fire before voting, a sip after swearing an oath, a quiet nod at the ash line before reading a decree aloud. Historians still argue whether the Prytanean flame burned without interruption in a literal 24-hour sense, or whether everlasting was honored symbolically, with regular banking and sensible relighting. Fuel, climate, and staff would have dictated practice city by city. Either way, the function is clear. People step into this room to be reminded that their arguments and alliances orbit a center that refuses to take sides, yet insists on decency. The fire doesn't vote. It supervises. You study the room's social traffic. Young men, just old enough to be important, and still young enough to be impressed, deliver messages and leave awed by how warm diplomacy can feel. A widow is ushered in by a relative to receive the city's help, her hands cupped around something hot, while an official review turns kinder in the glow. A craftsman honored for a public gift, perhaps a new bronze tripod, sits gingerly on the bench, cheeks flushed with, "How did I get here?" as a server sets down barley bread and olives. The city is baking gratitude into bread and calling it policy. Your eye strays to a corner shelf where a small coal box sits. Portable loyalty. Colonists setting off across salt water may still come to mind, lifting a coal from this very hearth, wrapping it in wool, dropping it carefully into a clay pot, then carrying it like an egg to a new shore. You see them now in your mind, seasick and stubborn, guarding that ember through spray and night. If the coal survives, the city's idea survives. The first hearth of the new town is not invented, it is continued. There's a murmur near the doorway. A runner from another polis holds a sealed tablet announcing games, sacrifices, and safe conduct for travelers. Invitations to Pan-Hellenic festivals ripple outward like warmth. The Prytanion receives the notice, warms it in a literal sense, then sends it on. Nobody lights a torch relay here in the modern fashion, but the metaphor is so tempting you can feel it tug. Still, you keep loyalty to older practice. The altar of Hestia in the Civic House is the original RSVP file. Midday, and a modest meal arrives. Nothing flamboyant, everything dignified. The steward serves first a tiny portion to the fire, then to guests of the city, then to the officials who will spend the afternoon deciding whether to repair a fountain, honor an old soldier, or adjust a tariff on barley. Decisions taste better when they pass through bread and heat. Even budgets look friendlier beside lentil soup. You sip with them, honorary minor official for the length of your swallow, and feel your opinions soften toward compromise. The flame approves this message. Joke 3. You turn to a plaque where names of the honorably fed are listed. Citizens granted cites for services, poets whose verses pleased, athletes crowned, foreign friends who saved a ship or a treaty. To dine at Hestia's table is to be braided into the city's memory. Gossip can unmake reputations, but the Prytanean's ledger makes some reputations hard to forget. The hearth here is literally an archive of gratitude that happens to keep porridge warm. And there, near the back, a narrower doorway opens onto a council chamber. On a modest pedestal sits another hearthstone, maybe smaller, maybe just as old, called by a different epithet. Councilors enter, touch the rim with discreet fingers, and take their places. You can almost hear the room practice its manners, clearing throats, smoothing tunics, unrolling wax tablets. The flame is not a mascot, it is the room's conscience. Afternoon lengthens and you step outside again, blinking against the agora's sunsparkle. You carry the Prytaneon's warmth in your sleeves. Everywhere you look, you see its radius. A baker's oven that feels a bit more like public service, a fountain where the water seems friendlier, because the city decided, in warmth, to fix it last year. A boundary dispute that will be argued tomorrow under the eye of Hestia, and therefore, you suspect, settled with more bread than shouting. Private hearths mimic the public one, and the public hearth borrows legitimacy from the private. The two warm each other like cupped hands. Evening comes, and you wander back for one last look. The steward banks the fire to a ruby heart, lamps glow in the adjacent rooms, and a late traveler eats slowly with relief, loosening his shoulders. You stand in the doorway where the city's breath moves in and out, and you let that breath steady your own. In your mind, you draw a line from this ember to every kitchen you've known, to every meeting that went better because someone set out cups, to every handshake that made more sense after sitting down. Hestia is the quiet clause in the social contract. We will be warm to one another, and therefore we can be brave together. You touch the lintel lightly, habit borrowed from people who lived this day 1,000 times, and head downhill. Streets cool, houses warm. The city's heart remains behind you, steadfast, so the doors along the alleys can glow one by one and imitate it. That is the arrangement, and it works. You have barely brushed the street dust from your sandals before the doorway teaches you its choreography. Pause at the threshold. Breathe out the world. Step in toward the glow. Hospitality begins here, where Hestia sits with her patient fire and tells everyone to lower their voice, even the rumors. A hand offers water first, always water, and then a stool near the hearth, so the day can leave your calves and the warmth can decide you are now indoors. Someone sweeps a clean arc at your feet. The ash line is straight as law. You say your name. The flame says, "Welcome." Mainstream fact: Greek xenia, guest friendship, was a deeply rooted code, from Homer to the neighborhood, binding host and stranger with reciprocal duties. The host offers food, bath, bed, and gifts. The guest offers respect, news, and future reciprocity. Zeus bore the epithet Xenios, protector of guests, but inside the door the ritual turns intimate under Hestia's eye. Before the cup touches your lips, a spoonful of drink tips to the floor for the hearth. Before your bread meets your teeth, a crumb joins the embers. The welcome is not just social, it is liturgical in a small, delicious way. You sit, and the room takes your measure without measuring. A basin arrives, the water bright with a pinch of ash and a drop of oil. Your fingers learn the house by the way it rinses them. A child hands you a cloth and looks very serious about being an official of the hearth. You manage not to dry your face with your sleeve for once. Joke 1. In the corner, a pot shifts from simmer to speak. The scent is barley and herbs, a hint of fish, enough to remind you that generosity is not a feast, but a steady ladle. Someone plucks a brand from the fire, lets it flame for a breath, then dips it into a bowl. Kernips again, the hiss that makes water suitable for small sacred things. The host flicks droplets at the threshold, and at you, a quiet baptism of belonging. You swear your shoulders lose a pound of road in that sound. The first cup is mixed, wine with water, obedient under Hestia's supervision, and the first sip is hers. The second is yours, and it tastes like the opposite of being hurried. Quirky tidbit: some families kept a little guest portion aside, an extra loaf or a wedge of cheese set near the hearth, insurance against surprise footsteps. They called it the stranger's piece, and it had a funny way of always finding a mouth by nightfall. In a few houses, you might even see a cracked token tucked near the fire, a symbolon, half kept by the host, half by a past guest. Broken pieces that match when reunited, proof that welcome has a memory longer than a single visit. It's the ancient version of "I know a guy," but with pottery. Joke 2. The talk begins where the warmth points it, where you've come from, whether the road was kind, which fountains are sweet this season, whether the fairy is grumpy. News flows into the room like a courier with sand in his sandals. The host's questions are gentle and practical. The fire edits out anything that would sour the bread. You ask your own, because conversation is also a dish served hot. How old is the child with the solemn towel? 3 summers? What makes the cat so confident? Seniority. The cat approves this assessment by sitting on your foot like a coaster. Your host sets a small basket of olives on the low table, a plate of herbs in oil, a heel of yesterday's loaf revived on the hearthstone. The house eats first with the goddess. 1 olive for the flame, a metaphorical one, thank you. 1 drop of oil to the ash, a pinch of salt to the ring, then with you. The sequence matters. It says to every god who might be listening, we do not hoard warmth. In return, the air in the room behaves, quarrels ease, spoons don't clatter, and even the dog begs with unusually ethical posture. Historians still argue whether the guest's first seat was always by the hearth, or if, in larger houses, a male visitor would be whisked directly to the andron, the men's dining room, while the domestic cult remained in the women's spaces. Some point to architectural plans where the kitchen court and hearth were clearly in the inner zone. Others remind that many meetings began at the threshold and the fire regardless of gendered rooms. You watch practice Trump theory. In this house, strangers become guests beside the coals, and only then do rooms sort themselves out. The ritual has small theatrical props. Over the door, wool fillets sway. Under your hand, the hearthstone is warm and slightly gritty. By your knee, a low stool sits exactly where your tired spine wants it. The host drops a laurel twig into the flames, and the polite crackle smells like good decisions. If you were a suppliant rather than a traveler, branch in hand, need in your chest, you would touch that branch to the hearth and the room would change job titles, host to protector, guest to sacred petitioner. Even the cat would concede the middle of the rug. A boy slips you a fig as if he's discovered a loophole in Xenia. You take it solemnly, as if he has just sworn you into office. Your fingers are sticky with sweetness. The host pretends not to see and then pretends to remember an extra fig for himself. It is the kind of cheating Hestia tolerates, possibly encourages. Bread follows, flat, kissed by the stone. Then a bowl of stew whose steam writes brief poems in the air. You lift your spoon and discover the house's philosophy. Generosity measured, flavors honest, seconds possible. There's a pause you learn to read. The host's chin tips toward the hearth, an almost invisible cue that it's time to exchange tokens of future memory. If this were a bond meant to endure, lifetimes-long guest friendship, you might each break a small object and keep halves. A pact that says, if your cousin shows up in 20 years with this shard, feed him as if he were me. The fire witnesses, the ash keeps the secret. You think about texting someone a tiny picture of a broken tile and realize the ancients invented two-factor authentication with clay. Joke 3. Time softens here. You talk until the cup shows the bottom more often than the top. The host's mother shuffles by with a broom that has opinions. The host's sister sets a little lump of dough near the warm edge to coax it into tomorrow's loaf. Every few minutes, a silent hand tends the hearth. Nudge a twig, bank a coal, stroke the ash smooth. You begin to understand that hospitality is not a performance. It is maintenance with witnesses. When you stand to leave, the house doesn't let you do it all at once. There's a final sip. The last libation to Hestia, closing bracket to match the first. A last wipe of your hands. A last look at the ash ring to see that no stray spark has rolled where it shouldn't. A packet appears in your palm. A bit of bread wrapped in a fig leaf. A strip of cheese folded like a secret. Perhaps a sprig of savory tied with thread. It's not payment. It's travel insurance against the universe's habit of becoming hungry at inconvenient distances. At the threshold, the host does what hosts do. Repeats your name so the house learns it, touches the door lintel as if to sign the guest book, and wishes you good sleep or safe roads as appropriate. You, in turn, promise the reciprocal shape of kindness. A bed when they knock at your door. A coal carried from your hearth if they must kindle a life somewhere new. The fire records both promises without ink. A final breath over the coals, the kind that says thank you and please keep, closes the scene. The door gives you back to the street. Behind you, the room reshapes itself around the same quiet center. Ahead of you, the city spins its 1,000 errands. You carry a warm radius in your sleeves. If the road should turn mean, you have a memory that answers it. If the night grows large, you have a small flame you can imagine into any room. Hestia's blessing is not a stamp. It is a temperature you keep. And tomorrow, when you step into someone else's glow, the choreography will start all over again. Patient as ash, generous as bread, orderly as an ember that knows its job and never brags. You're back at the hearth just in time for the next ritual. Dinner, but with a script that runs deeper than appetite. The pot already mutters like an old uncle. The bread smells faintly of smoke and patience, and you can feel the whole house orbiting this center as if nothing outside, agora noise, neighbors' goat problems, someone shouting about taxes, matters until the flame approves the menu. Mainstream fact. In Greek practice, sacrifices, whether a lavish ox for the gods or a humble supper in the courtyard, were framed by Hestia. A few grains, a splash of wine, a crumb of bread, first to her, last to her. No other god receives both bookends, which makes her less the diva and more the editor, ensuring the whole offering makes sense. Tonight your meal feels like the smallest edition of that ritual, and you're pleased to be included. The household lays things out with choreography. Olives glisten in a clay dish, bread wedges pile on a woven mat, cheese rests like a white moon on a plate darkened by smoke. Before anyone takes a bite, The youngest child solemnly pinches a crumb into the fire. The flame pops politely, as if to say, "Correct." Then the oldest pours a sip of wine onto the hearthstones, the hiss rising like punctuation. Only then do spoons and teeth get their turn. You realize you've been watching the most ordinary event in the world, a family meal. But the ceremony makes it feel like you've just witnessed a treaty signing, only with better soup. A quirky tidbit smolders in the ash. Some Greek families believed honey was Hestia's favorite sweet. A tiny spoonful dripped into the fire could sanctify not just meals, but also deals. Imagine your landlord agreeing to lower rent if you promise to add honey to your libation schedule. Joke 1. You eye the honey jar suspiciously, half tempted to test it, half afraid of sticky negotiations. The dog sidles up, eyeing the cheese, while the cat claims the prime bench by sheer authority. The parents talk softly about olive harvest yields, the children invent riddles, and the guest, you, leans closer to the flame, breathing in a meal that is mostly herbs but somehow tastes like ceremony. The air is thick with the perfume of thyme, garlic, and smoke. Someone jokes that Zeus himself couldn't smell better, and the dog wags his tail in agreement. Historians still argue whether Hestia's precedence in offerings was a holdover from pre-Olympian times, when household cults formed the backbone of Greek religion, or whether it developed later as ritual etiquette. A compromise so every sacrifice had a polite opening and closing. Either way, the practice gave her a role more constant than any thunderbolt spectacle. She was literally baked into every crumb of worship. As the meal continues, you notice the rhythm. Eat, joke, feed the fire. Sip, argue, tip the cup to the floor. No one calls attention to it. It's simply the grammar of eating. One child sneaks a grape early and is promptly ratted out by his sister. The father points at the fire, raises an eyebrow, and the boy sheepishly tosses the grape skin onto the coals, as though apologizing directly to Hestia. The crackle forgives him, though the sister is still smug. Joke 2. The guest basket appears. An extra wedge of bread set aside. Not eaten, but left near the hearth. You remember from earlier that this portion is meant for chance arrivals, the late traveler who knocks, or even the invisible spirits who hover hopefully. The bread sits quietly, but it carries a promise bigger than its crust. No matter how tight the rations, this house will always have a corner reserved for welcome. A philosophical cousin at the table muses aloud that perhaps the cosmos itself is one giant meal framed by Hestia, first and last. An eternal banquet with stars for olives and galaxies for bread. The others roll their eyes, but you tuck the thought away. Bread as astronomy makes sense if you squint and are at least half full of wine. The meal tapers, as all meals do. Bowls empty, spoons clink, children yawn. A final libation hisses on the hearthstone, bookending the dinner with a sound that feels like applause. The family leans back, stretching, satisfied but not stuffed. This isn't a feast. It's fuel with flavor, humility served warm, dignity disguised as chickpeas. You find your own stomach agreeing, grateful in a way that doesn't shout. Quirky tidbit again. Sometimes, before bed, a small offering of barley was tossed into the fire not for Hestia herself, but to bribe the household spirits, diamonds, into keeping the night free of bumps and squeaks. Tonight, someone sprinkles a few grains with a muttered aside, "For whoever's listening, that isn't Hestia." You smirk, comforted that even divinity needs subcontractors. Joke 3. As night folds around the room, the bowls are stacked, the crumbs swept toward the coals, the lamps trimmed and borrowed flame from the hearth renewed. The last sip of wine, once again, belongs to Hestia, and you watch the liquid hiss itself into memory. Dinner is over, but the house hasn't stopped eating. It's fed the goddess, the family, the spirits, and even you. The warmth radiates through your bones, and the quiet glow whispers the same lesson it whispered at dawn. Nothing begins or ends without the hearth. You lean back on your stool, belly humming with barley, eyes slow to blink, ears full of low laughter. The fire flickers once, then steadies. If Zeus claims thunder as proof of order, Hestia proves it with leftovers. The fire has carried you through meals, offerings, and civic decrees, But now it turns playful, its light catching quick feet and small hands. You shift on the bench to give children room, because Hestia's hearth is not just for solemn libations. It is the indoor playground, the classroom, the stage, and occasionally the arena where a sibling war over a toy ends in arbitration by ashline. Tonight the goddess watches them tumble into her glow, and you realize that even Olympus must sometimes babysit. Mainstream fact: Greek children grew up in households where play mingled with ritual and chores. Archaeological finds reveal simple toys: clay rattles, knucklebones, astragaloi, miniature carts, spinning tops. These weren't just distractions. Some doubled as training for future roles, teaching dexterity, counting, or storytelling. The hearth, being the brightest and safest spot in the house, naturally hosted this daily theater. The first act begins with knucklebones flicked onto the floor. The children squat, toss, snatch, squeal. The game is half skill, half chaos, and entirely competitive. You can't help noticing one boy sneak an extra bone into his pile. His sister narrows her eyes, appeals to the fire, and crackle! A coal pops just at the right moment, startling him into dropping it. The room laughs. Justice, courtesy of Hestia's spark, joke 1. Near the hearthstone, a toddler beats a rhythm with a clay rattle, proud as Apollo with his lyre. The sound is more pot rolling downhill than music, but everyone claps anyway. You suspect the goddess approves. After all, rhythm by the fire is as old as humanity. One older child tells a story with toy figures molded from wax: an ox, a hero, a suspiciously large fig, while the others shout plot twists. "The fig wins," they declare, collapsing in laughter. You're impressed. Homer could take notes. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe children's toys were occasionally dedicated to gods when a child came of age, hung in sanctuaries as if retiring them from duty. Dolls from girls, balls from boys, each offered at thresholds of adulthood. You picture Hestia's quiet hearth receiving a final knucklebone or doll, the firelight waving them into memory. The toy's shadow lingers, telling the story of growth better than any inscription. The room smells of bread crusts toasting at the fire's edge, snacks hidden in plain sight. A boy pretends to be Hermes, darting in to steal one, only to trip on the cat's tail and tumble into laughter. The cat glares, the family laughs harder, and someone mutters, "Hestia, teach him stealth before he breaks the dishes." You sip your cup and almost choke on your laugh. Joke 2. Historians still argue whether childhood in Greece was marked by carefree play or by early initiation into adult duties. Vase paintings show both: children chasing hoops, but also children carrying water jars or helping with looms. The hearth mediates the contradiction. Chores happen here, feeding the fire, fetching wood, but so does play. You watch a girl carefully add a twig to the flame and then immediately challenge her brother to a race around the benches. Both duties and games flicker in the same light. The games shift. Riddles now, the kind grandparents favor. What has one voice, yet becomes 4-footed, 2-footed, 3-footed? A child recites, eyes sparkling. You grin, recognizing the Sphinx's favorite riddle, though here it's delivered with less menace and more smugness. The boy who answers wrong, a goat, is sentenced to sweep the ash line. He does so dramatically, sighing like a tragic hero, while the others laugh. The hearth enjoys this performance. Ashes stirred in play are still ashes tended. A quirky bit of folklore drifts through the laughter. Some believe the hearth's smoke carried children's wishes upward, where gods might hear. Tonight, one girl whispers toward the curling smoke, "I wish for more figs tomorrow." Her brother immediately adds, "And for her to share them." The fire pops approvingly. You're tempted to whisper your own wish, a longer nap. But decide the gods already know. Joke 3 sparks when one child uses a clay cup as a helmet and declares himself Ares, god of war. His sister promptly bops him with a loaf crust and says, "Then I am Athena, and I win." The room dissolves into laughter, and the cup helmet slips down over his nose. Even the serious grandmother chuckles, shaking her head. The play doesn't distract from ritual, it completes it. Each burst of laughter feeds the same hearth that receives solemn libations. For Hestia, The measure of harmony includes giggles echoing off the rafters. You see how children's games are as essential as prayers. Both keep the household orbit steady. Both pass traditions without scrolls. A riddle repeated, a toy carved, a laugh remembered. These are the soft liturgies of growing up by firelight. As evening deepens, the children yawn mid-game. One boy lies flat, knuckle bones spilling like stars around him. Another curls against his mother, thumb sticky from figs. A girl dozes upright, still holding her doll, as if the hearth itself were cradling her. The adults tidy the playthings with practiced hands. Bones into a pouch, tops into a basket, crumbs into the fire. Childhood resets for tomorrow. The fire settles into a steady orange, and you realize the goddess has done it again. She has folded chaos into calm, giggles into memory, toys into tradition. You stretch, your own eyelids heavy, and think how odd it is that the coziest goddess claims her place not in statues or myths of conquest, but in rickety toys dropped by tired children. The hearth glows brighter for it. The fire hums steadily while the house fills with motion of another kind. Quieter, more deliberate. Women gather near the hearth, baskets of wool at their feet, jars of barley lined against the wall, the air smelling faintly of bread yeast and wet rushes. You settle in and notice how the flame reflects on their brooches and bracelets, turning simple copper into flickering gold. This is the part of the day when Hestia shows her other talent, running the household by warmth and wit rather than thunderbolts. Mainstream fact: in Greek households, women, whether mothers, daughters, or servants, tended the hearth, managed food, supervised weaving, and oversaw rituals of the home. Their work was central to the oikos, the unit that underpinned not just family life, but the city's economy and politics. While Athena might embody craft and strategy in epic poetry, it is Hestia who presides over the actual spinning wheel, the actual loaf, the actual jug of oil poured carefully and not wasted. You watch a woman thread wool through a loom set just within the fire's glow, each thread tightening like a line of verse. The clack of the shuttle is steady, rhythmic, hypnotic, like a metronome set to cosmic order. A girl helps by winding yarn into balls, her fingers quick, her hair falling into her eyes until another hand tucks it back. The loom and the hearth echo each other. One weaving cloth, the other weaving warmth. Both produce continuity. Quirky tidbit: some Greeks believed certain weaving patterns, especially spirals or meanders, carried protective power when hung near the hearth. A cloth with the right motif wasn't just decoration, it was a charm to keep out mischief. Tonight you see one such spiral cloth draped by the fire, its pattern catching the light until it looks almost alive. The grandmother insists it keeps away smoky demons. You nod gravely, deciding not to test the claim, joke one. Bread rises at the hearth's edge, its yeasty aroma wrestling pleasantly with the sharper scent of onions stewing in a pot. One woman sprinkles sesame over the dough, another rubs oil on her hands before lifting the heavy pan. Each motion has the grace of rehearsal, though no one announces it. You realize you're watching a performance in which the audience is both Hestia and the family's future selves. The bread tomorrow morning is the applause. Children drift back in, this time to help rather than play. A girl carries a jar of water, wobbling but determined. A boy fetches kindling, proud as if he were bringing spoils from battle. The women thank them with smiles, which double as instructions. Keep carrying, keep fetching, keep learning. The hearth isn't just flame, it's curriculum. Historians still argue whether women's authority over the household hearth translated into real influence beyond the threshold. Some argue it remained confined to domestic spaces. Others suggest it rippled outward, shaping festivals, household alliances, and even the politics of hospitality. Watching tonight, you lean toward the second. The woman pouring the ale here will indirectly influence which guest leaves with a promise or an insult. Domestic decisions echo further than smoke. The talk is as important as the tasks. They discuss wool prices, but also whose daughter is of marriageable age, which cousin's harvest failed, who left an offering at the city shrine last week, and who scandalously forgot. The gossip swirls like smoke, half serious, half necessary. The fire crackles at a particularly sharp comment, as if censoring the tone. Everyone laughs, the tension melts, and conversation shifts to recipes. You learn 5 new ways to prepare lentils, 3 of which involve more garlic than you thought legal. Joke 2. A jar of honey is opened for sweet cakes. One child sneaks a fingerful, only to be caught by her mother's raised eyebrow. The girl reluctantly drips a bit back into the jar, a sticky act of restitution. The fire hisses, as though keeping score, and the adults chuckle. Justice here is syrupy, but it works. Quirky tidbit again. In some rituals, women carried small hearth embers in clay pots to other households as part of festivals, symbolically linking homes together. It was both religious and social networking by coal. You imagine the women here gossiping while carrying glowing pots through the streets, half priestesses, half neighborhood ambassadors. Who needs Hermes when you have a grandmother with hot coals and sharp opinions? As the weaving grows, as the bread browns, as the stew thickens, the rhythm of the house becomes visible. Female hands setting the pace, Hestia keeping the beat. Even the men who drift in later for supper follow that rhythm without fully realizing it. The governance of the oikos has already been set before their sandals cross the threshold. Joke 3 arrives when one woman sighs, "If men ran the hearth, we'd be eating smoke for dinner." Another replies, "Only if they remembered to light it at all." The room erupts with laughter, the fire crackling in solidarity. You laugh too, quietly, because the evidence seems persuasive. Evening settles and the tasks wind down. The loom is covered, the bread cooled, the stew ladled. The women sit at last, sipping their own cups, chatting with less urgency. The fire glows brighter for them, as if rewarding patience. You sense the goddess leaning close, not just as patron of ritual, but as quiet witness to the hours of labor that never make it into epic verse. As the night deepens, you realize Hestia's authority comes through these hands. Spinning, kneading, stirring, sweeping. They keep the center alive, practical and sacred. The goddess doesn't shout about it. She breathes through it. And you, warmed and full, understand that without these hands, the flame would be only light and no life. The fire breathes with the rhythm of stories, and tonight, the room prepares itself for tales. Shadows climb the walls, lamps are trimmed low, and benches creak as people lean closer to the hearth. You draw your cloak tighter and watch as mouths soften, voices lower, and the goddess herself seems to hush the coals into just the right amount of crackle. Background percussion for a concert of words. Mainstream fact, storytelling in Greek households was often oral, passed from elders to children, from guest to host, from singer to sleepy audience. Myths, local histories, riddles, and songs lived in these spaces before they were ever written on papyrus. The hearth wasn't just a stage, it was the acoustic sweet spot, the place where stories warmed bodies and memory at the same time. The first story belongs to a grandmother, her voice gravelly but steady. She tells how Zeus once tried to disguise himself as a swan. Yes, the children already know, but they giggle anyway. Her version adds details about the bird waddling into the kitchen, demanding barley, and knocking over a pot. The whole room laughs, because in her telling, even gods can't be trusted around cookware. The flame flashes bright at the punchline, as if applauding, joke 1. Next comes a riddle contest. A boy asks, "What runs but never walks? Has a mouth but never talks?" The answer, a river, earns him bread crusts from everyone's plate. A girl counters with, "What has roots no one sees and is taller than trees?" The adults groan. She stole that from a visiting philosopher. Still, the hearth forgives her with a soft pop, and she bows dramatically. Quirky tidbit. Ancient riddles were sometimes used not only as entertainment, but as a way to practice quick thinking and memory skills. The hearth, being neutral ground, became the perfect classroom. You picture philosophers in the agora trying to sound profound, while households had already mastered the art of laughing through puzzles by firelight. A guest leans forward now, offering a tale from another polis. He speaks of a city's founding, settlers carrying coals from their mother hearth across the sea, shielding them from salt spray, kindling them again on strange soil. His hands mimic waves, storms, the careful cupping of fire. The children gape, imagining the sea. The adults nod, remembering their own civic myths. You taste the salt air in his words, and the fire answers with a hiss, like spray against wood. Historians still argue whether such colonist tales are literal. Did they truly ferry embers across seas? Or symbolic ritual stories retrofitted onto civic practice? Archaeology suggests both could be true. Tonight, in the glow of this flame, the debate doesn't matter. The story works. Someone else sings, plucking a lyre string gingerly, half-tuned, but the voice carries. The song praises Demeter's patience, Persephone's return, the cycle of fields and feasts. The refrain is picked up by two children, off-key but earnest. Even the cat seems to sway. The hearth keeps time, its embers shifting like drums. The storyteller's circle widens with gossip disguised as myth. A young man narrates how Heracles once ate so much stew he collapsed under the table. The grandmother interrupts. "That was your uncle, not Heracles." Laughter erupts. The boy blushes but grins. The line between legend and family anecdote blurs until everyone is both hero and punchline, joke too. Quirky tidbit again. In some Greek households, fragments of epic poetry might be performed at night, not formally, but as memory exercises. A line of Homer slipped in between jokes. A phrase from Hesiod wedged between gossip. Tonight, an older cousin quotes a verse about Dawn's rosy fingers, then adds, "Which is just a fancy way of saying someone else should stoke the fire." Everyone laughs and passes him the poker. You notice the ritual layering of the evening. Before each tale, someone flicks a crumb or a drop into the fire. Hestia receives every story as she receives every meal, a silent editor ensuring no tale leaves the hearth unblessed. Even tall tales sound steadier under her watch. Historians still argue how much of this oral world truly survived in written texts. Were Homer and Hesiod echoes of countless hearthside voices, or were the fireside stories mostly local, humorous, and never written? Sitting here, you suspect the latter. The laughter feels too fresh, too specific, too full of details about goats stealing figs, to ever have made it into solemn poetry. The evening winds down with a final game. Shadow puppets. A boy holds his hands to the fire, shaping a crude bird on the wall. His sister counters with a wolf. The bird flees, the wolf gives chase, the room erupts with giggles. The dog barks once, suspicious of this wall animal intrusion, and the grandmother assures him it's only a story. He's unconvinced, but eats the last crust anyway. Joke 3. When at last the tales sputter like the lamps, a libation closes the evening. Wine hisses on the stones, the last crumb toasts in the ember, and the fire dims to an orange smile. You recline, warmed by bread, laughter, and story. The goddess has done her work again, turning a room full of weary mortals into poets, singers, jokesters, and listeners, all with nothing but heat, light, and patience. You close your eyes and hear echoes, riddles whispered, songs hummed, laughter folded into ash. Tomorrow the chores will return, but tonight, the long memory of Hestia is written in giggles and glowing shadows. You glance around the circle of faces, and it hits you that one goddess hasn't walked into any of the outrageous epics you've retold tonight. Nobody's flown as a swan for her. Nobody's turned into a laurel to avoid her. And no Cyclops has ever shouted her name in a cave. Hestia's resume is strangely empty of chase scenes. The hearth smiles anyway, as if emptiness were a feature, not a gap, like a clean countertop before bread making. You realize you've been listening for thunder when the lesson here is the hum. Mainstream fact: in surviving Greek literature, Hestia rarely stars in a narrative myth. She's invoked, first and last at sacrifices, present in hymns, welcomed in prologues, but she doesn't headline an epic cycle like Demeter and Persephone, or a tragic tangle like Aphrodite and Phaedra. The Homeric hymns even include a brief hymn directly to her. Tender, ceremonial, more blessing than story. She's the epigraph of religion, not its plot twist. Once you notice it, the silence feels purposeful, like those white margins around a manuscript that keep the ink from running wild. You stir the coals and think of reasons. Part of you suspects that if you're the deity of everything holding together, you don't get time off to chase golden rams. Someone has to mind the soup while the rest of the cosmos goes full opera. Another part of you recognizes a literary bias. Poets love spectacle. Calm isn't dramatic unless you've ever tried to maintain it. You have. It's called a family dinner during olive harvest season. Joke 1. The flame lifts and lowers like a slow breath, and the room seems to agree. Hestia's absence from epics is not absence from life. If anything, she's everywhere that epics depend on. The conventions that let a bard begin, the household rituals that keep an audience fed, the municipal warmth that gives a city the leisure to sponsor festivals. Try writing a heroic seafaring tale when nobody remembered to salt the fish or warm the hall. Even Odysseus needed a tidy hearth to sit by before he could spin his story for the Phaeacians. A quirky tidbit flickers up through ash. Archaeologists sometimes find miniature hearths or oven models among votive deposits, little clay squares with raised rims like dollhouse altars. They're not crowd pleasers in museums. No heroic abs, no dramatic snakes. But they hint that people honored the idea of hearth with tiny hearths. You imagine a potter pressing a thumb into damp clay to make a mini fire bowl, then setting it at a sanctuary, a discreet thank you to the goddess of let dinner happen. It's a shrine that looks like a kitchen, which is exactly Hestia's brand. You wonder aloud whether the gods themselves told fewer stories about Hestia because her job made their stories possible. Zeus gets thunder because somebody else promises the ceiling won't leak. Athena gets strategy because somebody else keeps the lamp lit while she drafts outlines. Hermes steals cows because someone teaches him not to track mud past the hearth. Even trickery observes house rules. You can almost hear Hestia's voice. Not a sermon, just a gentle, shoes off. If epics were a stage, she'd be the lighting tech who never misses a cue and never gets a curtain call. Joke 2. Historians still argue whether that silence reflects an archaic layer of religion, where household cults were primary, public myths secondary, or a literary bias that privileges spectacle, written mostly by men who recorded festivals and politics louder than kitchens and cradles. Some propose that Hestia's worship was so ubiquitous, so routine, that it escaped the special event filter of poets. No scandal to report, no monster to slay, only bread to keep warm. Others counter that regional myths now lost might once have given her more narrative flesh. You sit with the uncertainty, the way you sit with a loaf that's still proofing. No rush. The shape will announce itself when ready. The contrast with her siblings sharpens the insight. Poseidon shakes the earth. Hades governs the beneath. Hera organizes the family drama with ruthless minutes-taking. Demeter rewrites seasons for love of a daughter. Hestia attends the moment before and after. The first libation, the last libation. The hinge, not the door. You've felt that hinge all evening. Riddle, crumb, hiss, story, crumb, hiss. The room relies on her punctuation to keep the paragraph from spilling into nonsense. Good punctuation doesn't get a fan club, but remove it and watch meaning wobble. You remember that list business. The rumor that Hestia surrendered her chair among the 12 so Dionysus could join. Whether that swap is ancient or a later tidy-up, the metaphor is too good. The hearth making room for the party. She steps back a half pace and the wine behaves, the music sits down between measures, the conversation remembers to eat. The trope is cozy, yes, but it's also structural. A system that can relocate its center without snapping is strong. Try that with a thunderbolt. You test the silence another way, by listening for it in legal oaths and household promises. A neighbor swears by Hestia to repay a loan. A bride circles the hearth and touches the stone. A magistrate's decree mentions dining at the city hearth as a civic honor. None of these moments is tale-worthy alone. Together they weave the net that holds a life. Hestia is the box on the form that says confirmed. Hardly anyone frames that certificate on a wall. Everyone relies on it. Another fringe-leaning whisper skates across the coals. In some later lore, people imagined Hestia so aversive to discord that even the muses lowered their voices when they entered a room with a well-kept hearth. Is it textual canon? Not really. More domestic folklore than footnote. But the image delights you. The 9 sisters tiptoeing, one of them muttering, inside voices, like a chorus of aunties. The flame approves with a mild pop. You think back to last night's grand tales, the swan capers, the lyre debuts, the shipwrecks and banquets, and notice how each scene improved if you insert, just off stage, a small, persistent glow. Achilles sulking? His mother pleads. The fire listens, supper still happens. Penelope unweaving by lamplight? Hestia holds the room steady so time can be tricked. Even Heracles, exhausted, needed a bench by a fire that didn't judge the smell of lion. Silences are scaffolds. You only notice them when they vanish. Hestia makes sure they don't. If an epic poet were brave enough to write a hymn to not falling apart, it would sound like this room. It would begin with ash swept into a clean ring and end with the hiss of the last drop of wine. In the middle, nothing extraordinary would happen. Soup would be stirred, a child would be tucked in, a guest would be fed, a promise would be kept. The poem would be accused of being boring, until the day the hearth went cold and the city discovered how much narrative depends on soup. You smile into the glow and accept that some deities are loved in absence, like the hum that proves the oven is on, like the scent that proves the bread is almost there. Hestia's myth is the refusal to abandon the unremarkable. If she had a monster, it would be dishes left for tomorrow. If she had a hero's weapon, it would be a well-seasoned ladle that never splashes. Joke 3. Her quest item would be the ember box that arrives on time. Beside you, someone straightens the hearthstone a fraction. The kind of adjustment nobody mentions, everybody notices. You catch the gesture and realize you're participating in her unwritten myth. The day we kept things from slipping. Impossibly small, cosmically large. The house thanks you with a warmer patch under your toes. And perhaps that's the closing thought the fire wants you to keep. Even gods need margins, and Hestia is the margin that lets divinity draw within the lines. Her silence is not a gap, but a boundary. Not the absence of action, but the presence of room. The flame trims itself and holds steady, as if to say, there, that's the story. You nod, newly fluent in a language without plot. And the room, pleased, returns to the business of being gently okay. You let the room reassemble itself into its most ordinary miracle. People doing what people do when no epic poet is watching. Breakfast ash has been swept into a neat ring. The broom leans in its corner like a retired spear, and the hearthstone wears a smudge the color of toast. You sit with the family as morning resets the choreography. Someone rinses figs, someone measures barley by clever handfuls, someone tells yesterday a little more kindly than it happened. Hestia's glow edits everything into gentler sentences. Mainstream fact, the oikos, the Greek household, was the backbone of ancient social life, economy, and ritual, with the hearth serving as its cult center. Daily worship to Hestia framed meals and milestones, and even when cooking shifted to separate rooms or courtyards, households still kept a sacred flame for offerings. You can see the architecture cooperating. A modest kitchen court where smoke can wander upward, an inner room where the hearth lives, an andron set aside for guests when speeches threaten to sprout. Yet whatever the floor plan says, the day still starts by the fire. The pot has a temper, and the family speaks its language. A finger along the rim to test heat. A wooden spoon set down so it doesn't scorch. A splash of oil that makes the flame purr. The youngest learns the rules by imitation. Feed the flame, don't crowd it. Always share the first crumb with the goddess. He performs the crumb ritual with the solemnity of a tiny magistrate, then ruins the effect by sneezing and saying, "Bless me, Hestia," which earns him a laugh and a napkin. Joke 1. You take your cup the way the house prefers. Watered wine for the adults, honeyed water for the children, both behaving under the hearth's supervision. The first sip tips to the floor. The second redraws your shoulders into something like posture. Talk flows in the same current every day. Who owes whom olives? Whether the ferry is late? Which neighbor has acquired a suspiciously chatty rooster? The rooster, everyone agrees, is either blessed or insufferable. The fire withholds comment. A quirky tidbit folds into the steam. Bread crust napkins. Some families keep a little pile of stale ends beside the hearth to use as finger wipers during cooking. Afterward, The crumbs become the fire's snack, a tidy loop of cleanliness and offering. Today, the grandmother demonstrates, dabs her fingertips with the gravitas of a priest, then flicks the crumbs to the ember. It answers with a soft, approving hiss. Your modern paper towels feel suddenly underdressed. Mid-morning, the house tilts toward tasks. The loom mutters in the corner. The cat inspects the basket of wool with professional interest. A child hums a song learned last night and forgets half the words, invents the rest. The stew is today's patient. Chickpeas again, but with a handful of greens and a rumor of garlic. Someone slips a laurel twig into the flame to fix the room's mood. The smoke writes polite advice into the rafters. You breathe it like tea. Outside, the neighbor's voice bounces in, tugging the threshold. She needs to borrow a sieve. She also just happens to have brought a fig, which is the correct password. Borrowing here is braided with blessing. Take the tool, leave a sweetness, step to the fire, tip a crumb. The goddess makes social glue out of pantry logistics. You wonder how many arguments in world history could have been avoided if everyone had been required to meet by a warm stove first. Joke 2. By noon, the glow slackens to a civil simmer. A small coal is lifted with tongs into a clay cup, the portable heart, because the aunt across the lane has let her fire fall asleep. The child who carries it steps like a priest and a tightrope walker combined, eyes narrowed with responsibility. You step to the doorway and watch him thread between sunlight and shade, the ember cupped in wool like a secret. When he returns, he has a fig in his mouth and triumph in his feet. Hestia's mail service never misses. Historians still argue whether most Greek cooking truly happened beside an indoor hearth or primarily in roofed courtyards and small outbuildings with portable braziers, especially in denser towns where smoke and space negotiated daily. Plans from excavations suggest variability by region and class. A Megaron-style center here, a courtyard kitchen there, improvisations everywhere. You look at this house and decide the debate has a practical answer. Wherever the safer flame is, the cooking goes. Wherever the honored flame is, the household prays. Afternoon turns the hearth into a school again. A child recites the names of months, prompted by the calendar scratched on a potsherd. Another practices numbers by counting olives into a bowl, miscounting on purpose to earn extras. The grandmother drills a proverb. Good order at the hearth, good order at the gate, and eyes you as if to confirm your handwriting is legible. You nod obediently. The dog wags in cursive. At dusk, neighbors drift in. An old friend who traveled to sell flax, a cousin who swears her vines bear sweeter grapes if she sweeps clockwise, a boy with a scraped knee who sits beside the hearth and forgets to ache. Hospitality proves itself again in small portions. A shared bowl, a pinch of salt, a spoon set in the guest's hand like a scepter. Someone reports that the Britannian steward told a joke at lunch. Someone else counters with a riddle too elaborate for the hour. The flame edits both. You notice etiquette that isn't written but never breaks. Shoes pause at the threshold. Voices drop one notch inside. No one drinks before the first hiss of libation. No one leaves before the last hiss. The bread is passed clockwise. The cat is passed to no one. He passes himself wherever he pleases. The child who sneezed earlier now remembers to turn his head away from the pot and is awarded a heroic pat on the shoulder. Character growth, courtesy of the hearth. Supper leans hearty and unpretentious. Lentils wink up from their dark lagoon. Greens sit glossy in oil. A scrap of fish performs above its pay grade with lemon and salt. Every serving begins with a crumb to the coals, the smallest sacrifice with the largest intention. Keep us decent, keep this room steady. Tonight, a neighbor offers a sliver of honeycomb to the fire for sweetness in the coming week, and the smell lifts like a blessing you can taste. You feel the air's temperature become kind. Conversation turns practical. Tomorrow's washing, next week's journey, the rumor that a traveling poet will perform near the fountain. The poet, you are assured, has excellent hair. The grandmother snorts. Hair won't fill a pot. And the room enjoys the verdict. Joke 3. Someone glances at the ash ring to check it's smooth. Someone checks the lamp's wick. Someone pulls a loaf from the hearth edge and thumps it like a heartbeat. The household does not declare itself stable, it behaves stable. A tiny drama. A spark hops where it shouldn't, kisses a rush mat. Before anxiety can invent a story, 3 hands smother it. One with the broom, one with a damp cloth, one with sheer, practiced calm. The fire seems to blush and then resume its manners. This is the secret pact. The goddess keeps the room warm. The room keeps the goddess contained. Coziness has boundaries, drawn in ash and habit. As night reclines over the courtyard, the last rituals cue themselves. Lamps lean in to borrow flame. A crumb, a hiss, a whisper. Hestia first, Hestia last. Someone draws a fingertip around the ash ring slowly, savoring the circle, like tracing a familiar face. The child with earlier ambition yawns mid-heroic posture and folds against his mother. The cat Gravity navigates into the warmest lap. The dog arranges himself into a parenthesis around everybody's feet. You stretch your toes toward the glow and count up the day's small economies. A borrowed sieve, a traveling coal, a loaf that rose, an argument that didn't. Nothing here will make a vase painting, and yet everything would make a life fall apart if missing. That may be Hestia's most persistent miracle, the way coziness turns repetition into resilience. A fire, a crumb, a hiss, a smile, again tomorrow, and again after that, until the city remembers its center because the center never forgot the city. You bank the coals with the respect of a closing librarian, ash over ember, lid over pot, quiet over chatter. The ring looks tidy, the lamps breathe little halos, and the room's temperature slips into lullaby. You lie down within the glow's reach and hear the same soft percussion you've been hearing all night. Crackle, spoon, footstep, sigh. Hestia is not a plot, but a pulse. And in that pulse, daily life becomes liturgy without ever announcing the service. You're still within arm's length of the coals when the door admits a different kind of guest. Ideas. The flame is steady, the room polite, and into that glow walk the philosophers, late as usual, sandal dust on their hems and arguments already warming up. They don't raise their voices. They don't need to. Hestia's light is the perfect blackboard. You settle closer, because the great trick of Greek thought is this. It starts at home, by the fire, and then it dares to describe the stars. Mainstream fact, Heraclitus, the cranky genius from Ephesus, spoke of reality as an ever-living fire, kindling and going out by measure. A cosmos that changes without chaos, order in flux. You look at the hearth and feel you finally get him. The flame is never the same twice, yet the ring of ash stays clean. The pot doesn't wander off. Supper still happens. Becoming and being learn to share a bench. If you want a syllabus for stability through change, it's written here in orange. The room nods like a chorus of quiet tutors. A man with careful hair, he'd like you to think he ignores it, clears his throat and invokes the Stoics. They love this fire too, he says. To them, the universe is permeated by a warm, rational breath. Pneuma. A fiery reason that shapes matter. They are the inventors of the inner thermostat, training the soul to keep an even temperature when weather, neighbors, and fate go weird. You watch the host add a measured log and think, yes, that's Stoic ethics in apron form. Fuel by measure, virtue by habit, nothing scorched. If only email threads came with a hearth poker. Joke 1. The flame flips a soft gold, and the Platonists take their turn. They don't claim the fire is ultimate. Forms sit elsewhere, cooler and brighter, but they do admire what the hearth teaches. Proportion, participation, a small, good copy of a larger good. A student sketches a triangle in ash, then sheepishly smooths it. The philosopher smiles. Better to leave the ring tidy than to prove triangles. Meanwhile, someone murmurs that Athens honored certain citizens with satesis, state dining at the Prytanion, so virtue literally ate at Hestia's table. The goddess who brackets sacrifice also brackets civic gratitude. Plato would approve of a city whose honors are warm, measured, and edible. Quirky tidbit. An Orphic hymn addresses Hestia as the cosmic center, the hearth of gods and men alike. Metaphysics in an apron, music in a ladle. You imagine a singer facing a modest brazier, speaking to an unimaginable core. The scale shift makes your head tilt. This ember, those galaxies, 1 grammar of warmth. If a priest ever told you the Milky Way is just spilt flour on a cosmic worktop, you'd smile and pass the sieve. Aristotle sidles in, carrying categories and a calm you could balance a pot on. He points out what the household proves. The oikos is primary. By its order, you can reason up to the city and then to constitutions. The hearth sets a mean. Too cold and you starve, too hot and you burn. Virtue sits between. Bravery, not rashness. Generosity, not waste. He gestures at the ash ring. Maison, the middle. Someone proposes a test. Toss in a crumb. The hiss sounds like, just right, which is probably how you'd translate golden mean if you were a frying pan. Joke 2. The discussion leans from cosmos to ethics and back like a pendulum. The Stoic quotes again. Oikeiosis, growing familiarity, the way creatures learn what is their own and extend care outward, from self to family to city to world. You can see it happen here without footnotes. Coal to lamp, lamp to room to neighbor via the ember cup you carried earlier, neighbor to city via the Prytaneon. Warmth scales. Obligation follows heat lines. Even the dog practices oikeiosis, beginning with me and gradually admitting, also you, if you have cheese. Historians still argue whether Heraclitus meant literal fire as the basic stuff or used fire as the sharpest metaphor for process, energy, measure, change. They also tussle over how seriously to take the Orphic cosmic hearth. Is it cult poetry or philosophical commitment? Tonight the debate seems beside the point, because the room demonstrates both. Metaphor you can stir, ontology you can eat. Philosophy keeps borrowing ladles from Hestia and returning them mostly clean. A cynic has been leaning in the doorway, snorting softly. He warms his hands and announces that hearths are fine, but virtue requires simplicity. No fuss, no excess, no pride in polished ash. Everyone smiles. Hestia is already the goddess of no fuss. The cynic asks for a crust, gets one, and declares himself victorious. It's the most user-friendly syllogism you've ever seen. Somewhere outside, Diogenes sunbathes instead of coming indoors. The hearth shrugs. Cozy is an offer, not a rule. Joke 3. Ethics returns to its favorite test case. Anger. The philosopher asks what to do when someone storms in with thunder in their throat. The host answers without theory. Lower the room's temperature with bread. Raise its light with oil. Pour the first drop for Hestia so no one forgets manners. The flame approves. In your notebook, which is actually your memory, you write, de-escalation protocol, eel crumb, hiss, listen. You consider teaching this to a few internet comment sections. The conversation remembers politics. The Prytaneon rises in the mind like a second sun. Magistrates eating in public, ambassadors seated with courtesy, decrees signed in warmth. Someone quotes a proverb, good order at the hearth, good order at the gate. And Aristotle nods as if he wrote it. You picture again the day when all city fires were extinguished and relit from a purified source. Civic ethics rebooted by a common ember. No algorithm has ever fixed a city so quickly. A gentle counterexample arrives, Dionysus. If Hestia makes room for him, what then of frenzy, ecstasy, the glorious unbuttoning of order? The philosophers concede that measure is not meanness. Joy belongs, but only if it remembers to sit down and eat. Perhaps that's why the rumor about the 12, Hestia ceding a seat to Dionysus, feels wise even if late. Coziness that can host celebration without dissolving is the stronger coziness. A party that begins and ends with a crumb to the fire will leave fewer broken bowls. The boys from the academy get dreamy. One suggests the soul is a hearth. Feed it good fuel, habits, songs, friendships, and it keeps a steady light. Feed it gossip and grudges, and it smokes the rafters. The grandmother, who has suffered both gossip and grudges in actual rafters, raises an eyebrow and says, "Then sweep." Philosophy takes the note. A whisper of Pythagoras passes, ratios in lyre strings, harmony in numbers, the fire as a metronome of domestic music. The pot simmers in 3/2, the bread rises in 5/4, the ladle taps in patient quarters. You did not intend to count dinner, but now you can't stop hearing proportion. The hearth is teaching the kind of math that starts with appetite and ends with civic festivals running on time. Twilight creeps over the threshold. Lamps lean in for inheritance. Each receives a tongue of fire and toddles off to corners like small philosophers with new theses. A final libation sizzles. First Hestia, last Hestia, the classroom adjourns itself. The thinkers stand, stretch, and thank their hostess without quite realizing they've done so. Wisdom has a way of borrowing kitchens and claiming it was born in libraries. You remain a moment longer, palms open to the heat. The cosmos feels less like an abyss and more like a room you can keep, if you remember how to tend it. Order need not roar, it can hum. Ethics need not scold, it can simmer. And metaphysics, at least for tonight, wears an apron and smells faintly of sesame and smoke. You draw a fingertip around the ash ring, round, whole, measured, and think, if the universe has a center, it behaves like this. You sit with your hands out to the warmth and realize the oddest thing. For a goddess who never steals the scene, Hestia has quietly stolen the show. The room has learned your breath. The coals know your posture. The ladle has your name on it. And yet if you flip through the epic scrapbook, you won't find her wrestling sea monsters or disguising herself as anything with feathers. The paradox glows as steadily as the ember. Her lack of drama is the reason she lasts. You feel it in your bones like a chair that never wobbles, the kind you forget to praise because it never throws you. Mainstream fact. At sacrifices public and private, Greeks customarily offered to Hestia first and last, grain, a drop of wine, a crumb, framing every rite with her name. That ritual bracket, repeated across centuries and city-states, made her presence habitual, and habit is the most durable architecture a god can live in. The thunderbolt may draw crowds, the habit draws generations. You picture the Prytaneion's steady flame and 1,000 kitchen embers mimicking it, a network of calm that outlives every political speech. The cozy paradox rounds itself out. What doesn't demand attention accumulates it. While other gods perform, Hestia repeats. Repetition is where culture stores its keys. Every time a child pinches a crumb into the fire without looking up, the tradition binds itself tighter. The goddess is not absent. She is absorbed. You sip from your cup and realize you're participating in her most persuasive sermon. Eat with kindness, end with thanks, and do it again tomorrow. You consider launching a self-help scroll titled, Do It Again Tomorrow, and immediately decide the title is too on-brand to be allowed. Joke 1. You glance around at the household evidence, which has become so normal you almost miss it. The ash ring's edge is perfect. The broom stands like a conscientious soldier. Lamps lean in for rewrites of darkness. No one announces any of this. No one. The long memory of the room is written in actions that feel like breathing. If fame is a flash, Hestia is inhalation. You can't keep flashing, you must keep breathing. A quirky tidbit curls up from the coals like a house snake. Many Greek homes honored the agathos daemon, a benevolent snake spirit often imagined near the dining table or hearth. A little wine might be poured to it after meals. Sometimes it appears on reliefs as a serpent coiling toward an altar, an odd, friendly guardian of bread and boundaries. You picture Hestia tolerating, perhaps even adopting, the roommate. A quiet serpent that reminds everyone to eat politely, shed old slights, and grow. If the cat disapproves of the snake doesn't care. It's very stoic that way. Joke 2. The paradox explains itself in civic scale as well. Cities that relied on Hestia's flame at the Prytaneion didn't need to tell dramatic stories about her. They walked past her daily. Magistrates dined by her. Treaties were warmed by her. Colonists carried her in a wool-wrapped coal. Because she was the room, not the guest of honor, she slipped into everything without staining anything. Historians still argue whether this near invisibility signals a very old stratum of Greek religion, household cults predating grand Olympian theatrics, or a classical and later re-ranking that nudged Hestia off-center in literary lists while leaving her center in practice. Either way, literature's silence and life's noise parted ways here, and life kept the ladle. You think of wear and tear, the true test of a cult. Gods who thrive on festivals need funding, free days, and public appetite. Gods who live in kitchens need only a spark, a crumb, and stubbornness. Famine shrinks parades. Even famine guards its ember. War can cancel a procession. War can't stop a mother from tipping the first sip to the floor and whispering a name. The humble scale of Hestia's rites made them portable and recession-proof. She's the deity version of a recipe that works whether you have a bronze pot or a dented one. There's another angle to the paradox that makes you smile. By refusing plot, she becomes the default plot device that saves everyone else. Hera's temper? Cool it by the hearth before it becomes policy. Poseidon's swell? Dry the cloaks here and talk like shore people. Dionysus's volume? Fine. But begin with a crumb to Hestia and end with one, and the neighbors will forgive you. Even philosophers borrow her for metaphors. Order through change, center without spectacle, warmth as ethics. The goddess with no saga becomes the scaffolding of all sagas, the empty margin that keeps ink legible. You test the idea against your day. Where did the house behave best? Answer: where nobody was trying to be interesting. The bread rose because yeast did its quiet job. The quarrel cooled because someone fetched a second bowl. The child felt safe because rituals don't take nights off. If you crave permanence, you must learn the glamour of uneventful things. Hestia is the couture of uneventful. You consider embroidering that on a kitchen towel and giving it to Hermes. He would steal it immediately and claim he invented towels. Joke 3. Out beyond the door, marble heroes and bronze laws shout their names into stone. In here, your finger draws a circle in ash, and it means more. The circle says, begin kindly, end kindly, let the middle be human. How many epics would still be epics if you removed their dinners? How many cities would still be cities if you removed the room where food and oaths share a table? You imagine trying to sustain a cult of thunder on an empty stomach. The thought is loud and thin at once. You return to that rumor about the 12, that she yielded her throne to Dionysus, and the paradox smiles again. Yielding became proof of power. A center that can move has found a way to be everywhere. Hestia is not displaced, she's diffused. The wine god may get the seat, but she gets the seating plan. First and last, crumb and hiss, and the implicit rule that even a celebration must remember to eat. The list is the poem, the kitchen is the meter. Your mind wanders over to Rome for half a heartbeat, not to trespass on Vesta's chapter you visited earlier, but to note the endurance of the idea. Sacred fire, civic identity, domestic reliability. The silhouette stays recognizable, even when the language changes. Coziness crosses borders more efficiently than armies. It is, embarrassingly for every general, the final judge of whether a people feel at home. Back at the hearth, someone smooths a wrinkle in the rush mat. Someone else adjusts a lamp wick by the width of a bean. Small corrections. Endless, uncelebrated, irreplaceable. This is how a house refuses entropy. Hestia's paradox is simply the physics of kindness. Soft forces applied consistently can hold up a roof. No monument records who kept sweeping. The monument is that everyone kept eating. The silence that surrounds her name acquires a tone you didn't hear before. It isn't emptiness, it's restraint, a practiced refusal to compete with the things she makes possible. A musician would call it rest, a baker would call it proofing, a captain would call it ballast. Whatever the term, the effect is the same. Stability so gentle, it looks like nothing until you look with hunger. You feel the room take another quiet vote and pass another quiet law. Tonight we will do the ordinary things well. The lamp will not sputter, the bread will not burn, the story will not bite. The guest will not be hurried, the child will not be afraid of the door. These are small, boring victories, and none of them will get a hymn on their own. Together, they are the hymn. So the cozy paradox stands, red as coals and cool as ash. By choosing not to star in a single great story, Hestia stars in all the small ones, and the small ones add up to a life. You turn your palms to the heat and let them rest there, feeling the kind of certainty only patient flames supply. When the room finally dims and someone whispers first and last thanks, you hear the ember answer with a sound that has closed a million days. A polite hiss that means, again tomorrow. You let the evening fold you like warm dough and settle right where the glow is most persuasive. Shins to the heat, shoulder to a friendly post, breath matching the small size of the coals. The room is doing that end-of-day trick you've learned to trust. Sentences shorter, clatter gentler, cups heavier in the hand, as if wine has discovered gravity. Hestia doesn't cue sleep with trumpets. She just lowers the flame to the color of apricots and waits for your eyelids to agree. Mainstream fact: Greek households closed their daily rites by giving Hestia the last libation, the quiet good night that matched her first good morning. You watch that closing bracket happen again. A tiny tilt of the cup, the hiss on stone, the smell of warm grape rising like a lullaby. The ash ring holds. The lamps, having borrowed their tongues of fire, blur into halos at the room's edges. Even the broom looks drowsy, bristles slouched like a soldier off duty. You lean your palms inches above the coals and feel what philosophy tried to explain all afternoon: change without chaos. The flame is smaller than at supper, larger than need. It's performing that middle virtue you can taste but won't name, because naming wakes the brain. The cat makes himself a comma at your ankle. The dog chooses to impersonate a rug and succeeds. Someone sets tomorrow's dough to doze near the warm edge. The tiny bubbles begin their patient rehearsals, a yeast chorus clearing throats for morning. A quirky tidbit soft steps across your thoughts. Some families marked foreheads with a touch of hearth soot on especially tender nights, after a quarrel resolved, after a safe return, to remember the warmth that kept them together. It wasn't doctrine, just kitchen folklore with a dab of ash. You imagine a fingertip on your own brow, as light as smoke. A little smudge that says, "We're home." Keep it that way. Your mind rolls through the day's familiar loops, but slower. Crumb, hiss, door, pause, lamp, borrow, child, yawn. You hear a late whisper of gossip make an appearance, shrug off its drama at the threshold, and wash itself into a story about figs instead. Hestia's flame edits even this, leaving only the kind parts. Somewhere a cork gives a tired pop, somewhere else a pot lid clucks. Every sound is softer near sleep, as if the house has discovered velvet. Historians still argue whether that rumor about the 12, Hestia ceding her seat to Dionysus, reflects a real cultic shift, or a tidy later solution to a messy guest list. You smile at the debate and let it drift. Tonight you've watched her do the harder version anyway. She makes room without moving. The wine god can have the chair if he behaves. The center remains the center because the soup won't stir itself. The children are already at half speed. One lists sideways against a parent, thumb smelling faintly of honey. Another negotiates with a blanket and loses with relief. The grandmother does that last slow patrol, hands hovering over wick and hinge and sleepy dog, with the expertise of a captain walking her deck. The hearth approves each checkpoint with a tiny pop, like stamps in a passport to dreams. You try to remember if you blew out one lamp or two and decide you don't need to. The room knows. That is the luxury of ritual. You put your weight in it and it holds. If you've ever made the mistake of checking your thoughts before bed, you have. You'll find that a hearth gives better diagnostics than any list can. Put hand to heat. Too hot? Feed less? Too cold? Add a twig. Just right? Look, you're already drowsing. Joke 1. A late guest slips in with the body language of apology. The courtesy choreography still works at this hour. Water first, then a stool, then a spoon. The fire makes space without brightening rudely. A crumb kisses the coal. A good night as much as a welcome. And the room resumes its hush. You wonder if Hestia invented the rule about not texting after dark, and then remember she prefers rules you can taste. Joke 2. The ash ring is immaculate. A small moon you could trace in your sleep. You do, in fact. Fingertip once around. A soft, absent-minded orbit. In your mind you pile beside it everything the day needed. Bread crust napkins, the sieve that came home, the traveling coal that returned victorious, the philosopher's triangle smoothed away, the snake spirit that may or may not be peeking from the baseboard and seems either way well-fed. The room collects these scraps without fuss and turns them into rest. There's a bump at the door, then silence, then the careful shuffle of a latch that knows it's late. You picture the Pretanayan up the hill doing its own banking, stewards tucking the city's ember under ash, magistrates stepping into cool lanes with warm sleeves. All over the map, private coals mimic public coals. The way stars might mimic a larger fire you don't need to locate. The thought is almost too big for bedtime, so you set it down like a cup and let it be warm within reach. You tuck your feet nearer the heat and feel the coil of sleep tug. If a worry tries to sneak in, did I say that too sharply? Do we have enough barley? Will the fairy be less grumpy? It discovers it must pass the hearth like a watchman. Most worries are terrible at small talk. They decline to enter. The few that make it to the room sit down, accept bread, and shrink enough to fit in a pocket. Hestia's magic is not banishment. It's portion control. Joke 3. Someone whispers a last, first and last, under their breath. Someone else answers with the smallest pour and the softest hiss. The coals answer with a gentleness you feel at the eyelids. You pull the blanket to chin height, fold into the comma that the cat bequeathed to you, and trust the center to keep its promise again. The flame dims not as a negation, but as an invitation. Less light, more sleep. Same warmth. The room is quiet now. Quiet in the way a seashell is. Full of soft echoes you have to want to hear. The breath of the house spreads in long, even strokes, drifting out from the hearth and settling along the benches, across your shoulders, inside your chest. The embers lower themselves into a velvet red you can feel more than see, and the shadows relax into gentler corners. Every small thing takes its time, the clockless kind of time that comes when a space has been kindly kept. You let your eyelids linger half closed and follow the slow map your body offers. Warmth at the shins, a ribbon of cool at the temple, the careful weight of the blanket learning your shape and agreeing with it. Somewhere close, a cup is set down softly. Somewhere farther, a door pinches the night closed with a friendly click. Each sound stretches into a longer, quieter version of itself. Then let's go. If thoughts rise, they arrive like feathers and drift the way feathers do, turning once or twice, landing lightly, forgetting what they meant to remind you. The hearth keeps the last small vigil, a patient pulse that doesn't need you to do anything except breathe. The house will carry the coals forward, the dough will climb in its bowl, the broom will be where you left it. None of it requests your attention now. You could name what you're grateful for, or you could just feel your shoulders release one more inch and let gratitude be a temperature. The floor knows you, the pillow learns you, the air forgives you for the day. If a worry returns, it finds a seat, takes a sip, and decides to wait until morning to speak. So you drift, simple as a crumb into a quiet flame, easy as breath into sleep. The glow dims, the room softens, the center holds. You are kept, and you are safe, and you are already almost gone, carried by warmth into the gentlest dark.